In 2008, the story that I'll tell started. We as a church were a broken congregation, and probably 40, 50 people that our median age was over 50. And yet we're wondering, felt God still had planted us here. We didn't feel that our doors were to be closed. And our pastor suggested two things. One would be sponsoring a family through Church World Service, and the other one was working with Bridge of Hope. Now, because our congregation had done some sponsorship twice before, that one was a little bit better fit, but Church World Service came to us with a family of 6 that was coming in 2 weeks, and could we sponsor them? We talked about it as a congregation, and some just thought it was a no-brainer. Of course we should do this. We were praying about something. Here's an invitation. Some just were, no, we have so many needs in our own congregation. That's just bigger than what we can handle. Family of 6, it's too many people. Maybe if they have another family, we can take them. But a couple weeks later, there's a family of 4 that came, and we sponsored them. And it was the perfect family for us to sponsor. Our congregation was a little scared of words at this point. We had been wounded by words, and here were people that couldn't talk to us in our language, and we couldn't talk. So we learned nonverbal language, and hugs and smiles and caring, and we took care of the 2- and 4-year-old while the parents did ESL classes. And this family had been Buddhist, but before they came, 2 months before, had been baptized. But really, there was no biblical literacy there. But our language was shown in our action. Interestingly, this family had her siblings and parents coming 5 months later, and we were desperately looking for another church to sponsor them, because we were so busy caring for this one, and we wanted someone else to find. Thought sure another family would love them, but they didn't, so we just absorbed them too. And Sahey, the mother of our first family, was the whole reason our church is what it is today. Because every time a new Korean family would come, and this was in 2008, churches were hunkering down. Before, 87% of new arrivals had church sponsors. Only 17% that year did. So she'd call us, we have some new arrivals. Who will pick them up to bring them to church? It wasn't will somebody, well, who? And so we kept getting more and more people picking up people. So the first thing of our relationship was just being an advocate, being friends. We got to more places, I should say but as a congregation, in Lancaster City than we ever were to before. At one time I counted maybe like 50 different offices. Or, when else did I go to PTFs in McCaskey, or go to, you just be an advocate. I'll give you one simple little example. I was taking my middle school person for the first time to Wheatland. Now, their names are not her name is Hesa, but Hesa is spelled H-E-L. So what are people going to call her? Hell. And I just went round, to first teacher, and I automatically saw what was happening. So I went up to the teacher and said, this is where Hesa's name is on your roster. It's pronounced this way. And I went home and made notes to go to the office, to go to all our teachers. I figured if there's one little thing I can help in her life that she doesn't get profiled as hell is in our class, Anyhow, but the next step, I could talk a little more about their stories. The Karen people are from Burma, have had history of years of civil war. One of my best friends would tell her story of leaving as a 10-year-old, fleeing with her mother and her siblings and her father, and she and her mother are the only ones living anymore. Her husband, on the other hand, spent 27 years at a refugee camp. Never knew anything beside refugee camp life. So anyhow, our first thing was learning that. But in 2010, 2 years later, another big wave of new arrivals came. Again, So he's inviting them to our church, but most of these people have a long history of Christian faith. And so how then can we use their gifts in the church? And so I remember the meeting in our, we have an outside worship planning committee, and I said, what do you think? Do you think we could do an experiment for 2 months that you plan the service? And, oh yes, we can do that. Well, this changed everything because they, and it's become every Sunday, and we've never had a break since that. And they started having other people from the area, sponsored by other churches, come together. So that was the second part. And the third thing that I just would like to say is so much happens on the way. It's not just on your Sunday morning. The conversations you have on the way is where I say so much happens. Yeah, sitting beside someone, waiting in an appointment, and asking questions, hearing their stories. But we do know that God calls us to be there with the person who he sends to us and learn from them, and we learn a lot about God through their conversations, through their prayers and their trust. My husband Jonathan says, when you're walking beside something like a person's like this, your prayers and their prayers, how they intersect. You have someone that's praying for housing and can't find housing. And the only way they can find housing is if you sign on their lease, because then they can get in. And they lose their job. And then that impacts you, and you're praying for their job together. So it really is an intersection. I remember being in a home with a mother who was working with preterm labor, and we had bed bugs in the house. Another person was sick, and we had our little prayer meeting in the living room. I'm saying, Lord, we come to you as needy people. Help us. And so that's where we are together.